The sky above Zululand burned with the cries of war. Thousands of Zulu warriors surged forward, their shields glinting under the African sun, their voices thundering like the roar of the earth itself. On the other side, British soldiers in red coats stood in tight lines, rifles aimed, cannons ready, believing their empire's power could never be broken. But within hours, the pride of Britain would be swallowed by the dust of Isandlwana. This was no ordinary battle. It was January 22nd, 1879, a day that would stun the world. At the foot of a lonely hill, the strongest empire of the time clashed with a people armed mostly with spears. The result was a defeat so shocking that London newspapers struggled to believe it. The Zulu nation, fighting for their land and their way of life, destroyed an entire British column in one of the most dramatic upsets in history. How did this happen? How did warriors without guns bring down the empire that ruled half the world? And why does the Battle of Isandlwana still echo through history more than a century later? Join us as we step onto the battlefield, retrace the events that led to this clash, and uncover the strategy, courage, and mistakes that shaped one of the most famous colonial wars in Africa. This is the story of the Battle of Isandlwana, the day the Zulu humbled the British Empire. In the late 1870s, Britain had its eyes set on controlling southern Africa. They wanted to expand their empire and link their colonies together. But there was a problem. The Zulu Kingdom, ruled by King Cetshwayo, stood strong and independent. The Zulus had one of the most organised and powerful armies in Africa at the time. Disciplined in the art of close combat and guided by traditions passed down through generations. The British believed they could crush the Zulus quickly. In January 1879, they invaded Zululand without fear, bringing with them thousands of soldiers, modern rifles and artillery. To them, the Zulus were savages with spears who could not possibly stand against the gunpowder and steel of the empire. But arrogance is often the seed of defeat. On the morning of January 22nd, 1879, about 1,700 British soldiers and African allies were camped near a rocky hill called Isandlwana. They believed they were safe. Their leader, Lord Chelmsford, had divided the army. He marched out with part of the troops to search for the Zulu army, leaving the camp lightly defended. What Chelmsford did not know was that the main Zulu force, over 20,000 warriors, was already nearby, hiding in valleys and behind ridges. The Zulus were waiting, silent and ready to strike. The camp at Isandlwana was not well prepared. The soldiers had not built strong defences. Ammunition was stored in boxes that were difficult to open quickly, and the troops were spread out. To the British, the Zulu threat still seemed distant. They had no idea that death was already surrounding them. The Zulus fought with a system called the Horns of the Buffalo. It was a brilliant military strategy. The centre of the army, known as the chest, would hold the enemy in place. The two horns, stretching out wide, would move around to surround the enemy. The loins, or reserve forces, would wait behind, ready to strike when the moment was right. This strategy had destroyed enemy after enemy in southern Africa. On this day, it would face the British army for the first time in full force. King Cetshwayo had ordered his warriors not to invade British lands, but to defend Zululand. The Zulus were fighting for their homes, their families, and their way of life. That spirit made their courage unbreakable. Late in the morning, British scouts spotted movement on the hills. Suddenly, thousands of Zulus rose from the grass, and ridges like shadows turning into men. The earth shook with their war cries. The camp at Isandlwana had woken up too late. The British soldiers quickly formed lines and opened fire. Their rifles and cannons tore into the advancing Zulu ranks. Hundreds fell, but the warriors kept coming. They moved fast, using the land for cover, and pressed forward without fear. The chest held the British front, while the horns began to spread wide, slowly wrapping around the camp. The battle grew fierce. Smoke from rifles filled the air. Soldiers shouted orders, while warriors shouted war cries that echoed across the hills. For every Zulu that fell, Timor seemed to rise from the dust. The British fired volley after volley, but their supply of bullets was slowing. Ammunition boxes were difficult to open, and panic spread among the troops. The Zulu horns were closing in. By early afternoon, the British lines began to break. Warriors rushed through gaps in the defence. Spears met bayonets in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Soldiers who had believed themselves safe under the flag of the Empire now fought for their lives in chaos. The horns of the buffalo had closed completely. The British were surrounded. There was no escape. At that moment, the pride of Pai met the fury of a people defending their land. The hill of Isandlwana became a place of screams, blood, and death. The outcome was clear. The British camp was collapsing. The sun was high in the sky when the last hope of the British camp faded. The Zulu warriors pressed in from all sides, their shields flashing and their spears striking with deadly force. The red coats of the British soldiers, once bright against the African soil, were now stained with blood. Gunfire grew weaker and weaker until it was drowned out by the sound of war cries and the clash of steel against bone. Men who had marched into Zululand with confidence now ran in panic. Some fled toward the hill of Isandlwana, others tried to break through the tightening Zulu ring. But the horns of the buffalo were merciless. Warriors moved swiftly, cutting down any who tried to escape. Even mounted officers on horseback were chased down and killed. Only a few managed to flee across the plains, racing toward the Buffalo River. Most never made it. Those who did survive carried with them the terrifying memory of thousands of Zulu spears striking as one. By mid-afternoon, the camp was silent except for the sounds of victory songs. Over 1,300 British soldiers and their African allies lay dead. The ground was littered with broken rifles, scattered equipment, and bodies lying beneath the shadow of the great hill. The Zulus, too, had paid a heavy price. Thousands of warriors had fallen under British gunfire, but their sacrifice had secured a stunning victory. The mighty British Empire, feared across the world,
This is terrible
had been defeated in open battle by African warriors armed mainly with spears and shields. It was a moment that shook history. When news of Isandlwana reached London, the Empire was stunned. Never before had such a defeat been suffered at the hands of what the British called a native army. Newspapers carried the story with disbelief and outrage. How could the world's strongest army be destroyed by men without modern weapons? For the Zulus, it was proof of their strength, their courage, and their unity under King Cetshwayo. The land they fought for was still theirs, and the invaders had been humbled. But victory also came with a warning. The British Empire was not a force that accepted humiliation quietly. After the disaster at Isandlwana, Britain quickly sent reinforcements. Thousands more soldiers, armed with better weapons and stronger supplies, marched into Zululand. They were determined to crush the Zulu Kingdom once and for all. Though the Zulus won at Isandlwana, the war did not end there. Battles continued, some in favour of the Zulus, others for the British. But the resources and firepower of the Empire were too great to resist forever. By July 1879, the British had regrouped, invaded again, and finally captured King Cetshwayo. The proud kingdom of the Zulu was forced to bow, but the memory of Isandlwana remained unbroken. The Battle of Isandlwana was more than just a clash of armies. It was a story of courage and arrogance, of pride and resistance. For the British, it was a lesson that their empire was not untouchable. For the Zulus, it was the peak of their military glory. A day when they proved that unity and bravery could bring down even the strongest enemy. The rocky hill of Isandlwana still stands in South Africa today, silent but powerful. Beneath its shadow lie the spirits of warriors and soldiers who met in one of the most famous battles of the colonial wars. Visitors still walk the ground where thousands fell, and the wind carries echoes of war cries and rifle fire from that fateful day. Until next time, keep exploring history with us.